Make sure you try this question out on your own before you watch this video. Let's go ahead and now read the text, and I'll give some running commentary on what I'm thinking as I'm reading this text as we do so. And then I'll go to the choices and see which choice is the best answer, and we'll do a deep dive into this question to see what's going on and why the answer is what it is. Like many other genera of wild bees, bumblebees have in recent decades experienced population collapse caused by, among other factors, habitat destruction and climate variation. For some reason, the SAT likes passages about bees and climate collapse. I don't know, it just seems to be a very common topic. But here we're talking about a specific kind of bee, the bumblebee. Bumblebees are also one of the most researched bee genera, second only to honeybees. As a result, ecologists have gained much of their insight about wild bee declines from bumblebees. So we're kind of giving some context here of bumblebees are well studied, and so for that reason, they are used to glean insight about other non-bumblebee species. Okay. In a 2021 paper, they note that bumblebees are among the relatively few wild bee genera that display social behaviors and dietary generalism, ability to obtain nectar and pollen from a diversity of plant species, two traits that are associated with increased resilience to some specific environmental changes. So what I notice here is a tension, and this is very common in SAT reading passages where they lay out some claim or some condition or some circumstance, and then they follow up with some kind of conflicting or contrasting idea. And so I detect a tension between what we just read here and what I've highlighted in blue. The whole point of the blue part is bumblebees are well studied, and therefore they are used to compare to other bees. The part I bracketed in red, though, says there's a very important way in which, though, bumblebees are quite different from many other wild bee species. There's a tension here, right? We're trying to use them to draw conclusions about other species while there's this important factor, important characteristic of these bees that's different. Okay. Gisbane therefore contends that blank. So my guess is, given this tension, that whatever's going to go into this blank is going to reflect that contradiction or that tension. But we'll see. Let's go to our choices. Although bumblebees and many other wild bees have experienced similar population declines in the past, compared with other wild bees, bumblebees are likely at greater risk of being harmed by climate variation than by habitat destruction. Seems to be the opposite of where this text is going, in particular with what we read in this bracketed lines. Right? These characteristics of bumblebees, their social behavior and dietary generalism, are actually increase their resilience to specific environmental changes. It's a little vague there, but to me, that's saying that, if anything, bumblebees should be a bit more resistant to processes that might lead to colony collapse. So to me, A seems to be the opposite of what I'm looking for. And what I like to talk about with these logical completion questions is A kind of goes against the spirit of the text. Like, this is just taking a random turn away from where the text is leading us. And it's kind of the opposite of what we want. So let's get rid of A. B, although bumblebees have been more extensively studied than most wild bees, researchers should not use bumblebees to draw conclusions about the decline of other wild bees. So far, this is moving in the right direction. You could argue it's a bit too strong, bit too definitive. Like, they certainly have used bumblebees to kind of gain insight about other wild bees in the past. Would we want to be as absolute and say we should not use it at all? I don't know. But so far, I'm not completely offended by this choice. Even ones with feeding patterns and levels of sociability that are similar to those of bumblebees. And now I'm a little more worried about B, because we're saying, like, you should never or you should not use bumblebees to draw conclusions about other bees, even ones that are similar to bumblebees in these particular ways. And I think this is even more of a bridge too far, because, again, B is being a little bit too absolute, a little bit too strong by saying you should not use bumblebees to draw conclusions about other populations. Even that is a little bit sketchy. But not being able to compare them even to bees that are similar to bumblebees in these specific ways, again, this just seems too strong. So to me, this is a too strong choice. It goes too far. It's too extreme. And so I think we can get rid of B. C, because bumblebees and other bees with generalist diets are less negatively affected by environmental stress than bees with specialized diets are. Seems to be what's implied by this discussion here, right? If they're able to be resilient to specific environmental changes, the implication is maybe they're going to be, less affected by environmental stress generally. But let's keep going. They are less likely to experience major population changes in the future than bees with specialized diets are. So again, I think we just go too far. This basically just does not follow the logic of the text. Yes, these bees have these characteristics that are associated with increased resilience, but notice the relative weakness of that language. associated with increased resilience. We're not saying that they're, immune or strongly resilient against these sorts of processes in general. We're just saying it's associated with increased resilience. So to go so far as to say that they're less likely to experience major populations in the future compared to specialized diets, I think it's just too far. We're reaching too far beyond what the text can support. Yeah, maybe will they do better on average in certain circumstances? Maybe. But again, I'm always scared of choices that are a bit too strong and a bit too definitive. And I think we see the same thing in C as we did in B to some extent. So hopefully D is right. Because the responses of bumblebees and other wild bees to environmental threats are not always comparable, that kind of fits with this line, right? They're kind of saying, look, because these bumblebees have these characteristics, they're going to be different from other types of wild bees that don't have these characteristics. Therefore, they're not going to be comparable in certain ways. Researchers need to exercise caution when extrapolating information about wild bee population declines from bumblebees. This is hitting all the marks I wanted to hit. First, contrast this language in D to what we saw in B and C. Need to exercise caution means we need to be careful. Take care. Don't go too far one way or the other, right? Whereas B, and to some extent C, are too strong in their claims. B is saying you should not use them to draw conclusions, period. Seems to go too far. Whereas D is saying, let's be careful. Let's be careful how we use these bees given their differences, right? And we want to exercise caution when extrapolating information about wild bee population declines from bumblebees. And this, in some sense, another part of D that I like, is a direct response to this highlighted bit, right? This not resolves the tension, but addresses the tension to say, bumblebees have been used in the past as almost like a model species for these other bees. We're using these bumblebees to draw and gain insights about other species that are not bumblebees. But then there's this tension of, but they're, in a very important way, they're not like other species. So therefore, again, we don't want to completely throw the baby out with the bathwater, the bee out with the bathwater. I don't know. We can still use them. We just have to be careful. We have to be careful extrapolating from bumblebees to other species, given the significant difference. So D is kind of what I was looking for. It resolves that tension between the claim in the highlighted blue and the caveat or the sort of counterpoint in the red bracket, and that's a lot of times exactly what we're looking for in these kinds of questions. So in this case, we get choice D.